forward as chair from that group. And now we're recording. Okay. So just take that opportunity. I'm quite happy to talk to any individuals who wish to discuss whether in fact they would like to become chair and what's actually involved in that process. I'm sure Tamar, you'd be willing to happy to speak to people as well, but I wanted to sort of make that clear from the start to give people that opportunity to have a think through in terms of whether this is something they wish to take on. Okay. We'll move on now to the next item on the agenda, which is to actually look at the minutes from the last meeting, which took place some time ago now on the 12th of January. So good luck if you can actually remember whether these are an accurate record of that meeting or not. But what we'll do is go through this fairly quickly, just going page by page. And so if you do have a point, a matter of accuracy, please do raise your hand. So looking at the agenda pack and following the page numbering based on the agenda pack, so page 3. And then page 4, which is really around schools budget setting. Page 5. Which focuses really on early years funding formula. Page 6. And then finally, page 7. So assuming nobody has any concerns regarding those minutes from January, and therefore I'm assuming we can agree those minutes as a correct record. Okay. Thank you very much. In which case, then we'll move to item 3, which is a review of membership and proportionality of Forum. And can I ask, please, Tamar, if you'd like to introduce this report?
Yes, hello. So just very briefly, the key points to note on the report are that we looked at the proportionality and we felt that there was no need to adjust the proportionality at this time. The main points are regarding appointments for review. There are 2 appointments up for re-election. So we have Joan Hardwick, maintains school representative, and Simon Bainbridge as well. So both of those are up for re-election. And there are 2 vacancies in relation to academies. So there's John, who's just announced he's stepping down from Forum, and also an outstanding vacancy. And there are 2 vacancies in relation to maintain school governor representative and the post-16 FE representative. There's a full list of the current and voting and non-voting representatives at Appendix 1, and we'll review elections to fill the vacancies and appointments will take place ahead of the November Schools Forum as normal. Thanks, John.
Thank you, Tamar. And obviously, Joe, Simon, your terms of office are coming to an end. You obviously can stand again if you wish, and subject obviously to your sectors, etc. But just like to thank you for your service and contribution to Forum over that 4-year term. Yes, you may obviously be returning here in November. Clearly, as I said a few moments ago, we need to replace myself and also find another academy representative, and we'll work through CEO Forum to do that. Maintain school governor vacancies are a matter for the local authority, so I'm sure they'll be taking that forward. And Richard Spencer, obviously Vice Chair of Forum, and I discussed briefly last week about actually trying to get a post-16 representative and probably going through Cambridgeshire secondary heads for that. So that's obviously something that group will take forward. Okay, in which case then members of Schools Forum are asked to note and comment on that report, which you've had the opportunity to do. Unless anybody's got any further comments, we'll move on. Can't see any hands up again. In which case then we'll go to the substantial item of today's agenda, which is school balances and DSG general financial health 23-24. Some of this will sort of consider some of the wider financial implications as well. But I'm now going to hand over to Martin Wade and to Fran Cox as our interim service director. So I'll hand over to both of you for this next item.
Thank you, John. So obviously this is the paper we bring to Schools Forum on an annual basis, just to share the kind of the balances from the end of the previous financial year, and just kind of give a few of the headlines of the kind of the budget setting for the current financial year that we're in, primarily around maintained schools. But obviously, as per request from Forum in previous years, we have tried to include some of the academy balances as per the academy counting returns as well, just for overall context of the financial health across all Cambridgeshire schools. So section 2 just sets out the kind of the maintained school balances at the end of the financial year, ended 31st of March 2024. And to be honest with you, it's a continuing trend from what we've seen from the previous couple of years, really, with reducing overall level of balances within schools. The primary balances have reduced by kind of over £2 million from the previous financial year. Obviously, the detail of the individual school balances is detailed in Appendix A, but obviously that continuing trend is obviously a concern for a number of those schools who are increasingly reliant on the use of balances on an annual basis. Obviously, individual circumstances differ between schools, but obviously we are seeing a significant increase in costs within schools around staffing, utilities, which obviously haven't necessarily been matched by the levels of funding received through the local funding formula. What we've actually seen in the primary sector, which is something that in all my time in Cambridgeshire, which is a long time, is we've actually started to see reduction in pupil numbers in totality across the primary phase, which is obviously having an impact for individual schools. And as it tends to be the case with these things, it's never a nice reduction in numbers, which allows you to neatly change your class structure. It tends to be across the whole school range. And so schools are struggling to kind of maintain those class structures for the number of pupils that they're having, which is obviously leading to significant challenges in some areas for those schools as well. The tables at 2.4 and 2.5 kind of set out the kind of the overall scale of the level of balances that you can see across in the different surplus ranges and the deficit ranges. Obviously, I think what is key is the number of schools which ended the financial year in deficit last year has more than doubled from the previous year, up to 31 schools ended the year with maintained schools with a deficit balance at the end of 23-24, compared to 14 in the previous year, which is obviously a significant concern. Again, going back to that sustainability of schools' budgets on a forward-looking trajectory. I'll step over to section 4 now, around the kind of a little bit more around the details. So obviously, as I said, 31 schools ended the year in deficit. As we've done the budget setting for this current financial year, initially 35 schools submitted, maintained schools submitted budgets with a deficit for the 24-25. That has now reduced to 34. One of them was an incorrect submission in terms of the numbers, and the school has actually set a balanced position in year for this year. However, that 34 again does represent a significant proportion of the maintained schools, and when we look further forward to some of the future year forecasts for a number of other schools, they are heading towards that deficit position as the use of their reserves and surpluses is kind of used up over the next couple of years. We've now, bar a couple of those schools, we've now issued notice of concerns to the majority of those schools. Some of those where we've effectively agreed their deficit recovery plans they have submitted, and therefore have approved their deficit license for the financial year. However, there are probably a greater proportion of those 34 schools where further intervention is going to be required. So effectively, either the budget recovery plan that they have submitted does not recover the full deficit over the next 4 years because of the scale of the issues in the individual school, or it's in excess of 5% of their annual school budget, which is outside of what's permitted currently within the scheme around that. So obviously some significant challenges for those schools. Been working very closely with Fran and team across education, and we recognise this is this is a significant challenge now, but is going to be an increasing challenge going forward, looking at the situation in individual schools. So we are working on a kind of a monitoring and intervention policy and strategy, where we're trying to bring together the kind of key officers from the different multidisciplinary areas. So across my team, across admissions, across SEND, across place planning, because obviously numbers are what is driving the kind of the school structures and some of the pressures within some of those schools. So we're looking at how we bring that together, and effectively what we're trying to do is identify what is the main cause of the issues within some of these schools, and effectively put them into different intervention strands, so that we can then best focus the support and challenge to those schools to help them in terms of their financial position going forward. So I'd say that's a piece of work that Fran and I have been working on, and we'll continue to work with that with Sarah when she starts in the role next month, to kind of develop that strategy further. Obviously, a key part of this is going to be identifying those schools and getting in there early to support them in terms of what they need to be doing now to avoid actually ending up in deficit in the first place. And we need to look how we do that differently. And I think a lot of that, again, is going to be around place planning and numbers, and looking at the structures of those individual schools, and also looking at what other structural solutions might be appropriate for those schools in terms of federation or other models, which might suit them better to help that delivery. In terms of that, I think it's fair to say they're probably the three main areas of concern are probably our maintained nursery schools, which obviously are all struggling in terms of the financial position, because of the way in which the early years single funding formula operates. Special schools, and there's a meeting next week with our three maintained special schools to look at the next steps about how that's going to work. And then our kind of small schools in the primary phase, where there are some significant sustainability issues around that. And as I say, there's some numbers of schools where they've seen quite significant falling rolls over the last probably 2-3 years in terms of that. So there's some key areas around there that we're looking at specifically. Just to finish off, just to kind of reference the school's financial value standard for maintained schools, and it's just really a plea to maintain schools and governors that, you know, this is a key piece of work, you know, just to give you that assurance in terms of schools. And I think it's something, again, that we're going to start scrutinising a little bit more in terms of the governance and how that's completed. So it's really just a plea to complete that as early as possible within the financial year. It doesn't need to wait until the end of the financial year, which I appreciate most schools tend to do. So it can be completed anytime. So I would kind of recommend that you start to do it during the kind of the start of the academic year, and build on that with governors as you go through, to ensure that those kind of governance arrangements are in place. And then for an internal audit have continued to do a range of visits to maintain schools in 23-24, and will continue to do so in 24-25. However, we're going to be working with them to look at actually where we can potentially kind of tailor those audits slightly differently to focus on some of those key issues which are causing issues for schools in financial difficulty. So rather than it always being a kind of a check on whether you have the right documents and things in place, just checking actually what is happening in practice in some of those schools as well. Then in terms of the academic balances, I've already mentioned, we've kind of shared the information as it's been presented on the DfE's Academies accounting returns, recognising that that is effectively almost a year out of date because of the dates in which that information is published, and also because of the way a number of trusts are now reporting. There is obviously not always going to be information for individual schools on there. So as we move forward, we might need to consider actually the value of the inclusion of that data in future years reporting. But I think it is useful to give that context across the wider picture across all Cambridgeshire schools. I'll pause there before I move on to the DSG. Just, I don't know, Fran, if you want to say anything more about the intervention elements.
Thanks, Martin. Yeah, you've covered it well. I think I just wanted to stress that I appreciate, and when we've spoken to head teacher forums over the past few weeks, it feels like the biggest topic of concern for many schools, and speaking to academy colleagues as well, I know it's not just the maintained institutions that are experiencing the pressure. Well, you know, I think the reality is, numbers and complexity of need are driving a lot of this, alongside the formulas, and as Martin's referenced, the kind of just the general cost of provision at the moment. And I think I've just heard a lot that I think what we've been reflecting on internally is our systems for support and monitoring and structure have historically been fine, because this issue has not been at the level that it is, but now they rapidly need to catch up with what schools need in order to support them in this space. So as Martin said, we've been doing a lot of work. I think we would envisage taking that draft policy through our internal processes over the summer, with Martin Purbrick's support, and bringing them to the relevant committee and to this forum as well in the autumn term, with a view to kind of publicly say, look, this is what we're going to do collectively in order to try and intervene and support. And as Martin said, it's a very, very complex issue. When you drill down, we've met and we've reviewed all of the schools and settings to determine, what do we think the causality is, and it's often very complex, as you well know. So I think we just need to be quite flexible and not at all linear in how we approach the monitoring and the support. In some cases, a simple staffing structure change or a simple school organisation change, albeit we know that there's a long lead-in period for that, will solve the problem. But in many instances, it's not that simple. So I think it's just a question of understanding that context, and for all schools to be able to understand that context, and then see what we could possibly do. But just a real commitment, I think, from the local authority that we are doing everything we can, working in partnership across the corporate functions within the organisation and education. This isn't a one-size-fits-all solution, but we're really mindful that we need to, and with Sarah incoming as service director over the summer, I know that it will be one of her top priorities to kind of launch this new strategy in the autumn with yourselves. So yeah, and I think the ongoing conversation has been really helpful with head teachers live, and kind of experiencing what it feels to be leading a school in this financial climate. I think we'd want that to continue over the autumn period, as well as we finalise those processes and do, we've got a good basis where we think that we need to work from, but just co-producing that really into the autumn and making sure that you feel it's maintain schools settings and special schools feel it's fit for purpose as well. So much more to come on that, but a real commitment from us that this will be a high priority moving forwards. Thanks, Martin.
Indeed, Fran, and I think it's fair to say as well, we've also taken a commitment to take this information back to Children and Young People's Committee in the autumn as well, in terms of the kind of the financial health, and it's now also going to form part of our kind of more regular reporting as part of our finance monitoring reports, just so that it's more transparent in terms of what the position is for kind of maintained schools and settings as we move forward in terms of those financial challenges. So I'll move on quickly to the overall dedicated schools grant position. So obviously, again, as part of the annual accounts, we have to submit what our final dedicated schools grant position, DSG position, is for the financial year, and the summary table at 8.1 shows the kind of how that's been presented and where we finished the 23-24 financial year. Effectively, we overspent in year again, which was kind of planned to a certain extent in terms of we were expecting to, but probably not to the level we actually ended up overspending due to the continuing pressures, specifically around high needs, and it kind of links back into the kind of the overall numbers of the HCPs and that complexity of need, kind of Fran's just referenced as well. So effectively, we overspent by 14.5 million, which when added to the existing deficit on the DSG means that we've carried forward a 40 million deficit on the DSG into the current financial year. As we've obviously previously spoken about, we are obviously part of the safety valve program with the DFE. Obviously, as yet we don't know what the new government's take is on the safety valve program and whether that will continue in the same guise or change, but we're currently working on the basis that we need to resubmit a revised plan to the DFE later in the year by October, and that's what we're working towards at the current time. So obviously our commitment is still to work through that, but in the same way as the kind of, we've alluded to with the challenges for individual schools, equally the complexity and that continuing need within the high needs block and the overall DSG is obviously a limiting factor in terms of what we can and can't do within that space there. So again, Fran, Martin, I don't know if you want to say any more on that before we open up to comments and questions.
We're all pausing for each other. Martin, did you want to say anything?
No, I've got nothing to add. Just that I was only going to say what Martin's already said about the resubmission in October. So we'll be working between now and then to kind of generate an accurate forecast of where we think we'll be and what over the lifetime of Safety Valve. But until we've worked out what that forecast is, it's difficult to say more than that. But that's what I want to say.
The only thing I would add is we've not explicitly mentioned it, but of course we are very, very acutely aware of the interface between children and young people with SEND in schools and the school's financial positions. And I think that whilst they're two separate streams of work, they're absolutely the same people are working on both from the local authority perspective, and there's an absolute appreciation that the banding, for example, that is part of the Safety Valve approach, will absolutely be part of the solution around schools' financial positions as well. So just to confirm, they're not being dealt with in isolation.
Okay, thank you very much, Fran, and Martin as well. I'm going to open this up now to questions based on obviously what you've just heard. And I think you had your hand up a few moments ago, Nikki, whether you want to come in first and then Ryan.
Thanks, John. First of all, just to say it's good to hear some of the talk about co-construction and about acknowledging the interplay between the SEND funding and the school's financial positions. But I do feel that we are missing opportunities to involve heads in those kind of understanding the financial challenges and how best to respond to it, because those letters that were sent out about use of balances and notices were sent out without any contextual information and caused quite a lot of distress amongst head teacher colleagues. I think particularly those who were not used to receiving notifications about financial difficulties. And my plea is just, when those notices go out, the wording that's used and also the context, so that schools and head teachers don't feel as though they are in isolation handling this. Even a simple thing like a covering letter that says this notice is going out to 122 schools. Your school is one to receive this. But I think the missed opportunities that we keep saying about, if we are going to have a real focus on finance next year, we need to be utilising the CPH reps meetings. We need to have finance there to be able to give us that bigger picture about what's happening in the local authority, because otherwise it can feel incredibly daunting to be faced with a situation where you feel as though you're managing an impossible budget and being asked to work miracles and do it on your own, and then receive a letter from the local authority reminding you of your obligation to set a balanced budget. So I think my plea is just, one, to be mindful of head teacher wellbeing when dealing with this and whether there is a better way to communicate those messages. And then my second question is that, being a head of a school that's historically been light touch in terms of finance, because we've had healthy balances. We've got more and more schools now that are no longer light touch, but our capacity within the local authority for, the finance officers that we have, is there any opportunity or any consideration of expanding the support that's going to be available? Because we are going to have more and more schools requiring more intensive rather than light touch support.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Fran, would you like to respond to that initially?
Yeah, thank you, Nikki. And I think that your feedback there is exactly, I think, what Martin and I have reflected on in the last month. The scheme for financing schools is what it is, and it's set in stone. And I think what's happened, because of the unique position that we're in now collectively financially, and I think it's important to say this is not just a Cambridgeshire issue, this is a national issue, is that we've almost jumped in at kind of the final stage. And I think this has then led us, and the draft policy, which we will share and finalise with yourselves in the autumn term, absolutely speaks to those earlier stages of intervention, so that in the future, when a notice of concern is issued, it would absolutely not be a surprise, or it would absolutely be after a significant period of time of working together. I think we are where we are, and I think your feedback and the feedback that we received at the forum 3 weeks ago was absolutely important, and that has all been fed into the draft place that we're in now in terms of the policy position, making sure that there is that partnership earlier on, as there is already within the finance team and kind of individual schools. But I think what's been missing, that is now hopefully going to be the strategic way forward, is that partnership across school improvement, across SEND services, across school place planning, bringing it all together so schools of whatever delegation feel that they have that kind of wraparound understanding of what's going on for them. And absolutely, to the well-being point, making sure that it is really well known that this is something that most head teachers are experiencing, not the few. And I think previously, as Martin's reflected in his paper, the 100% leap this year in the position that we're in, it was the few that were in this position, and probably therefore, and speaking to your point around resources, there had been much more intervention, support, conversation ahead of those letters being issued. So I think all of that, Nikki, has been already baked in, and really keen to share that with you all. I wouldn't want to bother you all with it in the last week of term, but we can share that with you in the early autumn to see if we've pitched it where you feel it needs to be pitched, and we can refine from there.
Just to add to that in terms of resources, Nikki, because I think you know the point you made around that is key, and again that's something Fran and I have been reflecting on, because in terms of what is the right level of intervention, what is the required resource to support schools in this as we go through. We've been working with a very small number of schools, and that's been quite intensive to do that, and as the number increases, obviously that's going to increase. So in respect of my team at the moment, we're actually out for advert for a senior finance business partner to kind of support the school's corporate team in terms of intervention and that side of it as well, just to add a little bit of a kind of additional support and resource around that. Obviously, in terms of the kind of the school's financial advisors, obviously that is a traded service, so we'd have to carefully consider what and how we could increase that resource around that, because obviously I appreciate at the moment there's obviously a lot of call on Ray Byford's time in terms of working with these schools specifically as well, so we just need to think about how we do that. But I think that's going to have to form part of the kind of the policy and strategy Fran's been talking about in terms of, what is the role of the local authority and what is the kind of the level of support we're actually able to put in. Our hope is, as we kind of filter down the kind of the schools and what their different intervention levels are, we can then identify where we do need to put that more targeted support. And the hope is that actually we can some of them are still going to continue to be light touch once we've done that initial assessment of what the issues are, and then really focus on those schools where there are no obvious solutions from kind of the initial analysis.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Martin, and Nikki also. You're
on mute, John.
I think I've got a slightly dodgy laptop. Thank you for raising that point really about the fragility of our head teachers as well, and the kind of pressure they're under. I think that's obviously quite key. And that issue about getting upstream really and trying to help those schools at an earlier point really in terms of actually avoiding a deficit. I'm going to go to Ryan, then to Councillor Taylor, then to Richard. Over to you, Ryan.
So my point really is about where we're going to end up. I'm quite concerned, having been involved nearly a year ago or more about working around banding and talking around that and being involved in some working groups, that things have gone somewhat quiet. I'm concerned that the amount of time it's taking to kind of get some clarity over what that will look like, around what funding for ERBs will look like, and specials. And my worry is exacerbated by the fact that I'm now in discussions with Norfolk Local Authority, who are also in the safety valve, who have unilaterally just slashed funding for SEND across the board. And I'm really concerned about the direction of travel in Cambridgeshire and the drive with the safety valve just to say we're delivering a balanced budget with very little concern for actually fulfilling the SEND code of conduct and meeting the individual needs and funding provision on EHCPs. And I'd like some reassurance really that we are not going to just drop off a cliff edge at some point and be told you're getting this is the amount of funding, which doesn't even come close to supporting what's on EHCPs, even when you take into account the 6,000 notional funding that schools are going to go in. And I'm really concerned because we're in this transitional phase. We seem to have stalled somewhat over the last year, and I know new people have come in and are coming in, but I'm really worried that the desire and the requirement to meet the safety valve requirements will drive the local authority to do something really quite drastic that will hugely impact schools and young people. And I'd like some reassurance about what the plan is to manage that over the coming year.
Martin Perbrick, do you want to start with that one? Then perhaps Fran and Martin want to add to it.
Yeah, I mean, until we've looked at first of all, that isn't our plan at the moment at all. I was with Norfolk colleagues over the course of this week and talking about some of the pressures they're facing, and so we're adopting a different approach at the moment. Largely, it's going to be based on the banding formula, which we haven't worked out the detail of yet, although quite a lot of work has taken place by Claire and her team. But also, it is going to come down to the forecast for our safety valve resubmission, which we haven't done yet. So I can't give you the cast iron guarantees that you want, but I can say that doing the activity that Norfolk did isn't part of our plan. So that's as close as I can get to giving you that reassurance. Until I see the numbers, when we've had a look at, I'm sure you can appreciate it's almost me talking blind until I see the numbers for our forecast resubmission. So we want to be as creative as possible so that we can work with schools to make sure that we put need first rather than anything else, so that we meet both the requirements of our safety valve but also the needs of our children. So it's a bit of a broad brush answer, but that's all I've got for you at the moment. But that kind of general commitment to not taking a hatchet to it and facing that cliff edge is we wouldn't want to be in that position.
Thanks, Martin. And I guess my follow-up would be that if we did make those decisions, going back to Nikki's point, and it doesn't apply to me because I'm not a maintained school, that obviously any significant changes that would then impact on budgets for individual schools would be recognised in how schools were supported moving forward, because that, a school putting a budget in place now, which then changes further down the line, obviously is outside of their control if that's a decision that's made by the local authority.
Yeah, so the safety valve is the local authorities. Local authority is the key partner in the safety valve, but actually it's all of our problem in many ways. So yeah, we'd hope that going forwards, what my aim would be that we could be as transparent as possible and actually co-produce some of the solutions rather than just have a decision that affects schools without them having any impact or say on it. So I'd hope that we could plan together depending on what the data tells us.
Thank you, Martin, for that. Appreciated.
And just to come back, Ryan, on the kind of the point around the banding process, as Martin's alluded to, the work is ongoing on at the moment. I know special schools have kind of co-produced the descriptors of need around that, and I think we're just waiting for some kind of initial pupil mapping so that I can start to do some kind of costing of what it looks like in totality in terms of that. And I think that's similar with the ERBs as well. So I actually had a meeting with colleagues last week, it might have been earlier this week, I've lost track of time, about it. And I think what we're trying to do at the moment is, or one of the next stages is actually bringing together all of the different descriptors for each of the different provision types, because in effect they've kind of been produced in separate, in isolation at the moment by the different groups. So I think we need to bring all those together, ensure that we're being consistent in terms of the language, and that it provides that kind of graduated response through, which then we can then kind of bring together as a single pack in terms of that banding system, to which then we can apply the funding amount. So that work is happening, and hopefully we can start to kind of show the results of that early in the autumn term.
Thanks, Martin. That's positive.
Councillor Taylor.
Hi, thank you. Yeah, my concerns are, well, they're not concerns. I'm hoping they're going to be positive concerns. So obviously this is not meant to be political. I am independent. So we have a new government. So what is this going to entail for our funding for schools? You know, we have had, certainly in the last 9 years that I've been on CYP, the funding has, you know, it's just got worse. It hasn't got better. And every time we come to these school forums, we're discussing, you know, our funding situations. So I'm just wondering if officers have got insight into, you know, what our new government might be giving us in our schools for funding, and will our safety valve continue as well? You know, do we know if anything's going to change?
I can pick that up. Hi, it's Martin. No, unfortunately, we don't know anything. I mean, it's very early days for the government. I know that this is very high up on their agenda, along with other children's issues, but we haven't had any formal communication about it at all. I've just been at the Association of Directors of Children's Services conference this week, and there's a lot of, they've already been in communication with ADCS and LGA about SEND in particular, and the priorities for educational funding, but I've got nothing to report.
Thank you very much. Richard?
Thanks, John. Just wanted to try and underline the importance of the recovery plan that was presented to us. Martin, I accept what you're saying about a resubmission in October. I think we need to see what progress has been made, if any, on that recovery plan against the objectives that were set. I'm slightly surprised that we haven't had a more fulsome update on that, to be honest, and I'd echo Ryan's point around the length of time with which we've been exploring banding options. It seems to me we could and perhaps should have moved quicker on that, but I don't know, because I can't judge that against the recovery plan. So I'd just urge, if possible, please, in the autumn, for any resubmission to be matched against a sense of where we are on that plan, the timescales, because the 1.5% transfer to the high needs block is a significant amount of money that, you know, we've lent our support to as Forum, you know, on the understanding that it's integral to the safety valve process, but it's money that goes out of schools, and that makes it even harder for us to deliver the services and the support that our young people and our families expect. So timescales around how long we can expect that transfer to be in place would be helpful, although I accept that's not something that, you know, local authority can determine because it's linked to the safety valve. But all those, I think, are going to be key in terms of retaining the support that we've had from Schools Forum and from the schools in the authority for the plans that have been in place. We need to stick closely to those, I think.
Yeah, again, I agree with what you're saying, Richard, and obviously the resubmission has to go hand in hand with looking at the recovery plan. So hopefully in the autumn we'll be able to bring that back to you. Absolutely.
Thank you very much. I'm just looking around the virtual room to see if anybody else has a hand raised. I suppose I've got a couple of questions really, and perhaps possibly for Martin Wade initially. I mean, where schools are now with the budgets that are actually set for 24-25, considering where those schools were 12 months ago, what do you project to be the situation in terms of deficit budgets across the authority by the time we get to April 25? Are we going to see lots of schools, even those now setting balanced budgets, which ultimately are going to be sort of tipping into deficit? I know that's quite difficult to kind of sort of predict, but what's your general feeling in terms of the health of those schools at the moment which are able to set a balanced budget?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I mean, I think if you look at the kind of the current projections and going back to what the letter Nikki kind of referred to yesterday about the advisory notice we sent out about balances, I think, that was kind of as a result of the concern when we were looking at, the proportion of balances schools have applied in this current year and the number of schools that effectively are using all of their balances up in the current financial year to set a budget. So obviously, if things don't fundamentally change within those schools, they are going to be in deficit next year. So I think, where we're currently looking at 34 this year, I think, if action is not taken, and I know in a number of schools, it is being taken, but based on the projections we've currently seen, you're probably looking at double that number heading into deficit in that year. And if you kind of projected that further, you'd probably look at the majority of schools will be deficit within the next 3 years. Now, that's not to say that obviously, we don't know what's going to happen, as we said, with funding levels. We don't know what's going to happen with any additional grants. So there's a lot of assumptions around that. And there's a lot of assumptions around pupil numbers and class structures as well within that. But the general trend and direction of travel is not a good one in terms of where we're looking at. So I think if things don't fundamentally change, we are going to see that number exponentially increasing year on year as it stands at the moment.
Thank you. And I think this goes back slightly to what Councillor Taylor was sort of saying, that we knew this cliff edge was coming, and we're now at that cliff edge, effectively, of reserves being exhausted in so many schools and very little room for manoeuvre. And I suppose picking up on the points that, in a sense, Ryan has made and Richard as well, in terms of some of those key pressures are undoubtedly around pupil numbers and the rise in energy costs and things that you cited earlier on. But I'm sure many of us on this call can point to the fact that we have a high number of EHCPs in school, where some of those pupils actually present incredibly challenging behaviours. One of our schools yesterday with 11 primary schools with 11 EHCPs, I had to basically approve the appointment of another teaching assistant, which puts the school into deficit, because the school would be unsafe, those children would be unsafe if they didn't have that support. And I know that's being replicated across the authority. So while we wait for that, so those capital places to become capital build places to become available, it's those schools that at the same time are having to handle this huge load. There is not an easy solution to this, but it's that sort of thing that we're now in this kind of perfect storm, really. Richard, your hand is up. Did you want to? Sorry, Fran. Yeah.
Sorry, just on your point there, I think I guess to say there is many things that we don't know moving into the new government, but there are a few that we do know, and I think this is where and we need to kind of and in the context of what Martin's just shared there, think big, and I guess perhaps not necessarily completely under the remit of Schools Forum, but more broadly in terms of education strategy. We know that pupil numbers will go down. We've got 10% less children coming in at reception this year than we did last year. That's significant. And we know that pupils with SEN will go up. And so that ratio, the kind of the amount of children with SEN, I read something on the TS this morning that was saying 1 in 5 children now in the classroom have SEN, and that's not going to change. That's only going to increase. So I think, it's about thinking, therefore, in that context around how we move forward in terms of how we structure ourselves, how we wrap around local authority support, I guess what I'm saying is, in the absence of much more detail coming out of central government at the moment, and probably likely to be that case until the autumn, we do have some things that we do know and that we are aware of. So I think that's a good start to plan on that basis. I don't think anybody is in the realm of thinking that the new special school places will solve this problem, because I think everything that's coming out of the previous government, and I've not seen anything to suggest that the current government think differently, is we are probably moving towards a situation where all schools will be expected to be schools for children with SEN at various levels. So I think it's useful just to think in that frame when we're planning forward, and very much I think when we are moving into the policy position around how we support schools that are currently in deficit, and thinking that that may significantly increase next year and the year after. It's what can we do within the context of what we can control. So I think just wanted to make that point. There are some things that we do know, and it's useful to think along the lines of that's not going to change, if that makes sense.
I completely agree, Fran. Balanced out, and coming back to Nikki's earlier point, that actually it's difficult for schools to actually put that level of support in without actually tipping into their reserves and so on. And, you know, it's that nuance that I suppose everybody's looking for in the system. But yes, we have to think differently really in terms of how we organise schools and how we organise the system as a whole. Richard, I'm not sure whether that's a legacy hand or a new hand. If I go to you first, then to Leslie.
Yeah, it's just a slightly new hand. Question really around some of the assumptions that have been applied. Obviously, the outgoing government failed to, I should have just stopped at failed to adequately tell us what we were going to be paid next year. So I don't know what assumptions have been applied for the maintained schools, Martin, or indeed from many of the academies that feed into those figures that you just shared around pay for the year ahead.
Yeah, and you're right, and this is where it kind of is a real dilemma, because we don't get told what the funding levels are going to be for the following year. We don't get told what the pay awards are going to be for the following year, and so actually we're having to take some quite broad brush assumptions around what those increases are going to be year on year. You know, taking support staff increases in pay as well, which is obviously quite often out of kind of the cycle of in terms of when those are agreed as well. And sometimes we don't know whether there's going to be additional grants, as we've seen with the teachers' pay grants and teachers' pay employer grants. So it is. If I'm brutally honest, in some cases it is guesswork in terms of what we're building in there. So I would like to think what schools have got in there at the moment, in most cases, is probably the kind of the worst case assumption about what could happen if the funding levels don't increase and if there are no additional grants to cover some of the additional costs. But you know, we're working a little bit in the dark at the moment in terms of what we think those future funding and costs are going to be. So, but I think it's something what we probably need to do is actually be very clear about what those assumptions are going forward, and so that everyone is clear about what has actually been built into those budgets. So when actually we do find out, we're very clear about what has changed from those original assumptions around that.
Thank you. Thanks. That's great.
Leslie?
Thank you. I just want to build on perhaps your point, John, about EHCs and so on. And I think primary schools at the moment are really struggling. We're going to have a primary school with 24 EHCPs in September, which is up to about between sort of 9-10% of that school. And it's, you know, it's the pressures it puts on induction, etc. So I think it's not just about funding for the child, it's also looking at the SENCO support as well. Because if you think, you know, for every EHCP, you've got the reviews, the support, etc., and then you've got the TA support. So I think we perhaps need to look at this slightly differently. I think I'd welcome a more joined up strategy, something that's forward thinking and not, you know, at the moment with crisis management. And I think, you know, that's detrimental to every child in the school. And actually, we do want to be inclusive, totally inclusive. But do we have to start thinking about a limit and making sure it's fair across the locality as well, so that, you know, we don't get one school that's something, or if we are going to have more in one school, therefore the resources put in, and actually we can do it more efficiently and effectively. You know, do we start looking at that sort of approach? Everybody wants to do the right thing by all our children and our families, but it's not just SEND. You know, the stress and the need for mental health, social care, etc. in schools are meant to do everything. So I think, you know, we need to change the narrative here. Schools are great places, and if we give people, you know, some resource and the confidence, they'll go on with it. Because at the moment, I feel we're just moaning, and that's not what we want to do. So can we look at some strategy here, and actually can we put expertise perhaps in you know, a fewer places rather than trying to spread it out so thinly, because it's not working. Just some thoughts.
So,
thank you, Leslie. Fran?
Thank you, Leslie. And I think, yeah, we had a really productive meeting, didn't we, with Martin there as well, to try and think more strategically. I think until the Children and Families Act is amended and changed, the current code of practice, I don't see it ever removing parental choice, and therefore we cannot, unless there's evidence that the school cannot meet need, we cannot currently move away from the fact that there is this disproportionality of some schools having higher numbers of children with EHCP than others. I think that's a reality that's enshrined in legislation, and it's very difficult to change.
That's brilliant. I totally agree with it, you know, and that's fair, but we can encourage and support and make it better for everybody, can't we?
I think the points that you raised there around, you know, we've got the ordinarily available provision. I think everybody, you know, that is great and brilliant. And if everybody was utilising that in mainstream schools, I still think that doesn't go far enough to speak to what you're saying there around how can we be more strategic around SENCO support? How can we be more strategic around, okay, so if the reality in the legislation is that some of our schools will have higher levels of SEN EHCPs than others, some schools have very high levels of SEN support. And that brings other unique challenges, you know, less funding, arguably. I think, how can we think creatively together around what does that mean? I think that was my point before around this is the reality of our school system moving forward. So how can we think differently about how we strategically work together across academies, across maintained schools, to, as you say, pool expertise and resources. I know our special school colleagues in the room would absolutely echo the fact that, you know, the transition, and we've had the conversation, Mark, around AP as well, kind of the stages and the steps of AP. If we get that bit right, then it will help the realities that we can't change. So I think all of that, I know Martin P's aspiration with Sarah moving forward to bake that into the refined inclusion strategy will be absolutely essential going forward. But I think there are certain things we can't change, and I think we just have to work then with the things that we can change, and how can we be creative around the fact that parents will always opt for the school of their preference, and there is very little we can do, regardless of the amount of children in the school with EHCPs already, to go against that preference. So I think, therefore, what can we do? I think so, Leslie. I think just again a renewed commitment from us to continue to work with you and others in that space to see what is possible.
Yeah, thank you. And we want parents to be, you know, to have the right place. Absolutely, it's just that I think we can help each other, and I think if we can all work together, you know, as in localities as well as across, you know, trusts, federations, maintained, I think we do need some strategizing here that actually happens. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Then Nikki.
Sorry, I think I'd agree with what Leslie said about this strategic approach and more collaboration. I also totally concur with Fran. Whilst the legislation remains as it is, that's going to be very challenging. But what I would say is I think there needs to be a bit more carrot and stick from the local authority. And I recognise it's difficult. And I look at this within my own organisation. The magnet effect for some schools is massive. And that's so challenging. And I'm finding increasingly, and I think due to some of the challenges the local authority are facing, where I was having discussions before where it was understood that certain schools kept a huge amount of the flow to special education at bay through really, really high quality inclusive practice that actually saves money, that those discussions have stopped, that collaboration has stopped. And what we're getting is you need to just crack on with the amount of money you're getting. And that's not tenable longer term, because what happens is either those children end up on packages outside of school or waiting for special school places that don't exist. And so I think, going back to what Leslie was saying, I think we need a more thoughtful approach to how we support those mainstream schools that are running at 10% plus EHCPs, and recognising that, because that will help the system further down the line. If those schools don't continue to take those young people, that links into the ERBs and actually recognising the funding for those, and again, like the banding model, getting moving on that. You know, we haven't done that. And then finally, actually challenging some school, you know, parents should be sending their, if ordinary available provision really exists and is really working, parents should be sending their children to their local primary or secondary. It shouldn't, you know, mainstream schools are mainstream schools. We're measured and held accountable in all the same ways, but it shouldn't be that one school only is able to take 5 children with an EHCP into year 7 because of some perception, and another has to take 27, of which 22 are coming from outside of their catchment area. And I know this isn't, Fran, your point's absolutely right. We're a bit stuck, but I think we need to be more collaborative, as Leslie said, within the parameters we find ourselves. And I'm finding that's not happening at the moment. And that's difficult.
Thank you, Ryan. Unless local authority officers want to respond to that one, I'll probably go to Nikki, and then we can perhaps start drawing some of this to a close.
I just want to, yeah, it's Martin. I'm happy to come in on that. I actually agree with a lot of what's been said. I think we do need to look at how we make decisions and probably go back down to a more district level of delivery, looking at where our send and sat teams can build stronger relationships on a local basis with the schools in that area, so that children can go to school in schools that are in their locality. And that's a piece of work that Sarah and I will be doing when Sarah comes in a few weeks' time. So we've got the summer to plan what we're doing, and then in the autumn time you'll see a real change in how we look at inclusion and how we work with schools in districts to kind of build that profile together, so that it feels like everyone is involved in making plans for their local area, rather than the local authority just creating a plan in isolation, because that isn't going to work. We are only going to solve this by working together. The nature of the system means that it puts us against each other when none of us want to be in that position, and that's partly down to its lack of funding. And we all feel that pain. But what we also know is that everyone in our area wants to do the right, and it's come out from everyone that's spoken today, everyone wants to do the right thing for children that have any additional needs, but it's how do we afford to do it? So hopefully over the rest of this year we can come up with a better plan for delivering that locally, but in partnership with each other.
Thank you very much, Martin. Nikki?
It just goes back to the question around partnership, and a request, please, as well. If we are thinking strategically, that we consider all of the range of partners that need to be having a consistent message, because I think one of the difficulties that we have is that sometimes we have conversations like this involving schools, but it doesn't then involve perhaps other partners like the family work team. And so the messages that are coming out are inconsistent. So you have got, and really, I think until we get that strategic approach of this is what the situation is with SEN, this is what you can reasonably expect schools to deliver, and that message is going out consistently with family workers, social workers, nursery schools, primary schools, we are going to keep coming up to this idea that you get a better deal at that school down the road, and that magnet effect. Because I know, as a head myself of a school which has, you know, always prided itself on being incredibly inclusive, I actually feel sick every time I have another child coming in with a potential EHCP, because my deficit between what it costs for provision for those children and what the income and funding for those children is currently sitting at £140,000. So every child that comes in is simply increasing that deficit. So I'm having to be very honest and open and transparent with parents to say, this is realistically what we are able to offer. And I just think that sometimes that conversation is more challenging because other partners are not being involved in the conversation to manage those parental expectations at an earlier stage, and a more consistent approach with that, I think, would benefit everybody.
Thank you, Nikki. I think that's a really valid point in terms of actually some of the messages we should give to parents and how we work with parents to ensure, I suppose, what is a more equitable distribution as well across the system. One or two last points, then we'll start drawing some of these key themes together. Mark?
Yeah, thanks, John. So just a response, really, just building on your point, Martin, about working together to sort of develop a local strategy and a cross-county strategy around SEND and AP. There'll be a number on the call, Olive being one, who are involved in some work with other local authorities, and also through the change programme work that we're delivering at the moment. There's some best practice and things we're picking up from that might be useful to feed into that work. So it's just an open offer on that one.
Great, thank you. I'll take you up on that. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Mark. Any last comments on this item? I think we've possibly got three actions really from this, and obviously to take forward into forum next year. First one is clearly an update on where we are with the safety valve, and obviously it won't necessarily be my responsibility, but when we get to November and December, where we start making decisions about setting the budget and obviously going forward with the safety valve and the movement from the schools block to the high needs block as part of that, I think forum on behalf of the different sectors in Cambridgeshire, we need to have that confidence about where the safety valve is going, albeit because obviously you're going through the process of renegotiation, but actually where are we in terms of actually meeting the initial targets that were set around the safety valve, that we have confidence going forward that actually that movement of money is actually still achieving the progress that we want to see in the safety valve. So I think that's absolutely one key. And although those conversations really take place with special school sector, early years reference groups, CPH, CSH, etc., it is schools forum that is the place where actually the financial decision is actually sort of approved. So I do think it's important for schools forum to get that update. I think, and I'm not sure whether this is actually possible, Martin Wade, just whether when we get towards the end of the autumn terms, there are two meetings, obviously a forum, one in November and one in December, where there's an update really in terms of where maintained schools are in terms of their budgets 24-25. So it's part of that context really when we're making a decision about the safety valve. I assume that's possible to do.
Yeah, just come on that, John. So yeah, so effectively we do a half year kind of position for schools to update their forecast for the year. So we do that. So I'll double check the timings of when we expect to do that. But our intention was to, because of the severity of the situation, was to do something around that, as I say, to report to CYP and obviously back to schools forum as well. So I'll work out the timings and then we can schedule that onto a future agenda.
Thank you very much. And I suppose that third action then coming back to, in a sense, what a number of members have actually sort of said, but certainly what Leslie was saying and Nikki around, that piece of work is not necessarily for forum, but there needs to be a place for it, where we're talking about how we, and obviously Sarah's work going forward, how we're building as much as we can do the sort of fairer distribution, the equity across the system, given your point, Fran, about actually where the legal framework actually sits. But actually, I think that sort of confidence that those wider teams that we're working with are actually supporting schools to manage the load that's actually sitting upon them. And we talked then about the pressure on SENCOs, on teaching assistants, clearly the pressure on other pupils in the class. We talk about being inclusive. It's about the inclusivity of all those young people, not just those with SEND, but actually the entire cohort. And absolutely the pressure upon head teachers. And I think what you said there, Nikki, in terms of that sort of, sort of deep intake of breath when you get an EHC coming in is an unsustainable position for the well-being of our workforce, but actually also the recruitment of future head teachers as well, which we know is an absolute national crisis. And this is all coming together and not helping that situation in any way. So certainly a plea there that actually through the various fora, that we're actually taking that debate forward about how those teams are going to work far more effectively. And what you said there, I suppose, Martin, in terms of the kind of district teams, what's actually going to look like in practice, that means there's far more joined up thinking than there is possibly going on at the moment to support schools. Okay, hopefully you've captured those various points. Tamar, I'm assuming there's no further comments on that item. But thank you very much, Fran and Martin, for presenting that paper. Unfortunately, over my time at forum, it's never really got any more positive. It may well do, hopefully, over the next few years, but I wouldn't hold our breath. Okay, next item on the agenda, I believe, Tamar, is the schools forum agenda plan.
Yes, nothing else to add other than what obviously the actions that you've just highlighted will ensure that they're on the agenda for the November meetings, and I'll liaise with officers on that. So,
okay, thank you very much. In which case, can I ask Schools Forum just to note the agenda plan, assuming nobody has any further comments on it? In which case then, it just leaves me to say a huge thank you to the local authority officers that supported Forum over the course of the past year. In particular, obviously, Martin and Fran for obviously stepping in over the last few months, and obviously going forward, Fran, we wish you all the best. My thanks obviously to Tamar as well in terms of the support that she has given Forum, and has actually given me in the role of Democratic Services. All of you working in very challenging circumstances, but we certainly don't doubt your dedication, your hard work on behalf of Cambridgeshire. And my thanks to all of you for your contributions, and for the past 4 years for actually supporting me in this role as chair. It's been an absolute privilege to be chair of Schools Forum on your behalf and that of Cambridgeshire as a whole. With only 1 week to go, I wish you all a positive end to the term and a wonderful holiday when it gets here. Thank you very much. The meeting is now to close. Next meeting, 8th November 2024.
Thanks, colleagues. Thank you, John. Appreciate it.
thanks.
Thanks all.
Thank you. Bye.